Part 1, SLA Theories Through a Social Epistemic Lens. Chapter 1, The Significance of Theoretical Development.
A concept is stronger than a fact.
Charlotte P. Gilman. When it comes to the SLA author's perceptions mentioned at the beginning of the introduction, one could wonder, why is it that most of them focus on theories as opposed to the evidence SLA has or has not produced? Do we not have evidence on the main issues, such as the critical period hypothesis, implicit and explicit learning, or the role of input, output and interaction? What about some other issues like individual differences or corrective feedback? While the answer is yes, we do have lots of evidence, there is no agreed-upon theoretical framework that can put all SLA evidence together in a coherent manner. Instead, we have many clashing theories with some partial overlaps and partial disagreements, a situation that renders the validity and weight of any and all evidence de facto relative. The more acquisition is researched, the more new theories emerge, and with them there comes an expansion of the field not in one, but in several directions. As Zhang 2020 points out, this situation makes it more difficult to identify the main themes in the field. P2, but before getting into the nature of disagreements and theoretical fragmentation, it is important to have a clear idea of what scientific theories are, and what they are meant to accomplish.
What are theories for?
Colloquially, theory is often used as synonymous with hypothesis or supposition, and often understood as an idea that exists before empirical evidence proves or disproves it. However, a better synonym for a scientific theory is the word explanation. Not just any kind of explanation, but one that is composed by both a collection of hypotheses and/or assumptions about the mechanisms or the inner workings of a phenomenon, as well as a body of evidence that supports, corroborates or even confirms them, although whether confirmation is possible remains a contested issue. Krupi, 2021. A scientific explanation does not only ask what and how much as in the Latin roots of qualitative and quantitative methods, but also why and how, see Gregg, 1993. So, on the quantitative front, not only whether A has an effect on B, or to what extent A affects or correlates with B, or in what combination of the letters of the alphabet we will see the interaction of A and B change, but why A should affect or be related to B in the first place, and how, that is, through which underlying mechanisms. And on the qualitative front, not only what are the perceptions, experiences, narratives and attitudes of certain people, but why, plausibly resulting from what, complementing our understanding of which phenomenon, allowing us to explain what. Importantly, theories do not just stop being theories after they are empirically confirmed. For example, the evolution of species is considered one of the most robustly confirmed phenomena, and it is described by a theory of evolution. Sometimes the development of an accurate theory, which can make reliable predictions or be operationalized in some way, comes before the observation of a phenomenon or the development of a technology. For example, theoretical physics led to the creation of the atomic bomb. However, sometimes a theory is developed after prediction and operationalization are already possible. For example,
Airplanes were flying before aeronautical engineers had an accurate theory of lift.
Oreskes 2019, p. 72. Prediction is neither causation nor explanation. That is, we can know what will happen, and still not know why or how. I am not alone in holding this view. In the SLA literature, Gregg 1993 discussed a similar point, and more recently, predictions that are left unexplained through the use of big data have led data scientists to arrive at similar observations, see Tiffin, 2019. Another crucial characteristic of a scientific explanation, also known as a theory, is that it provides a lens through which we can interpret the evidence. Thus, while there is extensive evidence that is produced daily in the field of SLA, there are several explanations, several theories, that could account for the exact same evidence in extremely different, even contradictory ways. For example, SLA researchers that subscribe to a generative view of language will interpret the acquisition of a second language as a process guided by grammar processing through the interaction between incoming language and a mental universal grammar, resulting in various grammar production stages leading slowly to increasing grammatical accuracy, while researchers that subscribe to a usage-based view of language will understand development as the collection of contextually situated linguistic exemplars, where the lines between the lexical, the grammatical, the semantic and the pragmatic are blurry. These exemplars are learnt semiotically, and then accumulate depending partially on how frequently they appear in the input, which allows for the gradual emergence of grammaticality. The same fact, namely learners' long-term development of grammar, can be understood in two opposite ways. Grammar is the processing means for acquisition versus grammar is an emergent trait of linguistic development. Not only can clashing theories interpret the same evidence in different ways, but they also offer different notions as to what method should be employed in order to generate valid evidence. Thus, the scientific rigor and validity of studies, the strength of their methods and the significance of their results are never theory independent, because all of the above are built under specific theoretical assumptions. I will exemplify this point through the case of complex dynamic systems theory, or CDST. Larson-Freeman, Hiver and Al-Houri. If an SLA study is short to mid-term that is cross-sectional with post-tests, or even delayed post-tests, and it observes the grammatical development of learners from a generative point of view, it will pose many validity issues through a CDST perspective, because this theory posits that interconnectedness of many variables and change over time cannot be captured in these kinds of short-term studies, and adopts an emergentist conception of language. Following this further, if a study assumes quantitative data from a sample can be used to make inferences about a larger population, an assumption that is built in statistical formulas, for example Bessel's correction, N1, this would also pose validity issues from a strict reading of CDST. According to Phil Hiver, one of the leading complexity theorists in SLA,
CDST doesn't adopt a philosophy of science that dictates the need to generalize from a sample to a population. Instead, a critical realist perspective tries to particularize to specific phenomena in specific contexts.
Phil Hiver, Personal Communication, September 8, 2023. These are not small theoretical disagreements. Depending on how we interpret these positions, they potentially render a large portion of SLA research in the last 30 to 50 years invalid. And while this may sound like quite an extravagant statement, some authors have indeed suggested that the marriage between usage-based linguistics and complex dynamic systems theory may represent the emergence of what Kuhn, 2012 would have described as a scientific revolution via paradigm shift, replacing the generative paradigm, which itself had replaced the structuralist paradigm, Holstein 2020. As we can appreciate, in their role of governing both methodology and interpretation, theories are powerful and consequential enough, where replacing one explanation with another has been seen by some to merit the use of the word revolution.
Theory-method coherence, an ambitious prospect.
The above discussion has important implications for quantitative studies, because even top representatives of quantitative SLA, for example Gass et al., 2021, do not seem to take into account the fact that statistics is a highly theoretically unsettled field, where current debates have been characterized as the statistics wars, Mayo 2018. Furthermore, the somewhat orthodox brand of inferential statistics employed by many researchers from diverse theoretical backgrounds is in fact not theory-neutral. Apart from the clash between CDST and the common practice of making decontextualized quantitative inferences from a sample to a hypothetical population, there are multiple theoretical assumptions built into orthodox inferential statistics that could run contrary to any given SLA theory's assumptions. Janssen et al. Provide a detailed critique of these assumptions, which include: a central tendency is relevant to the phenomenon being observed. A central tendency is representative of the inherent qualities of a population. C. Larger samples are more representative and less biased by default, among others. Perhaps one of the most potentially problematic foundations of contemporary statistics is the one examined by Cree 2021, who argues both frequentist and Bayesian statistics, the two leading paradigms, make quite an optimistic assumption for what probability is, namely the coupling of observations of frequency with degrees of belief. For a Cree, this is an irrational combination, which stems from an attempt to formalize what cannot be formalized uncertainty. Whether we agree with a Cree or not on the irrationality of such coupling, or with Jensen as to the potential invalidity of orthodox assumptions, is actually irrelevant. Because the issue is not that statistical assumptions are wrong, but that they entail ontological positions that may run contrary to the three underlying ontology of any given SLA theory. Theoretical coherence seems to be an incredibly complex, almost ambitious prospect. Yet, if we are to engage in scientific inquiry through an incoherent or unexamined set of assumptions, how could we be confident about the veracity of any claim whatsoever?
Scientific disagreement, fact according to whom?
An unsettled theoretical landscape leads us to a key philosophical question: what is a fact then? What can become a fact in SLA? While it may initially be tempting for most of us to answer, a fact is what is shown through empirical evidence. A historical view of science and a basic understanding of what scientific theories are will show the true answer is, it depends on the theory. Indeed, in science, the definition of the words empirical and evidence will not come from a dictionary, but from a theoretical stance. Only a unified theory would be able to provide what we colloquially understand as facts, and this is only if such theory were to be robustly confirmed, that is, at the same status as the theory of evolution, or the theory of relativity. Not to mention a theory may reach such a point, only to be later empirically or conceptually disproven, through further theoretical and technological developments, like it happened to Newtonian physics. As philosopher of science, Naomi Oreskes puts it in a plea for scientific humility:
Scientists should bear in mind that whatever conclusions they come to, and however they come to them, even with the best practices and the best of intentions, there is always the possibility of being wrong.
Oreskes, 2019, p. 139. This is, put in simple terms, one of the occupational hazards of being a scientist. We may indeed spend our entire career pursuing something that is partially or completely wrong. Think of the transition from Freud, when everything was about the mind, to Skinner, where getting rid of the mind and focusing on behavior instead was what being a rigorous scientist meant, to Chomsky, where focusing on the mind again meant rigor, to the takeover of inferential statistics as a means to test theories, to today's emphasis on interdisciplinarity. We constantly update our conceptions of validity and rigor, at times in a pendulum fashion from mind to behavior to mind again, and sometimes through innovative avenues from inferential statistics to interdisciplinarity. Today we may find Skinner's experiments gimmicky, the assumed connection between his theories and his methods dubious, and his conclusions reductive and largely unethical, but that may happen to us in the future too. Perhaps because we have seen particularly uncanny advances in science and technology in the last 20 years, or perhaps due to a very common, now equal to true past equal to false bias. We sometimes lose this historical perspective. Words like rigorous and empirical are subject to historical relativity. For some this may seem pessimistic. Are we doomed to fail our way to success? Will we not see anything even approaching truth in our lifetimes? Does theoretical success depend on the ruin of several researchers' careers and reputations? However, it would perhaps be best for the academic community to avoid what we may call fragile ego science, that is, a modus operandi where we feel the need to always prove our methods are the best, and to always produce positive evidence for our hypotheses, because if we do not, we feel we have failed as researchers or even as human beings. And where journals, performance measures and academic institutions not only reward this clearly immature attitude, but turn it into a career-saving strategy. In fact, there currently is an entire scientific reform aiming at mitigating such a style of science-making, through enterprises such as the World Conferences on Research Integrity Foundation, along with the Open Science Movement. A growing interest in studying science-making itself, and in devising ways to improve practices, also referred to as meta-science, is also noticeable in the creation of whole institutions for these goals, like the Research on Research Center and the Center for Open Science. The replication crisis in psychology has taught researchers, especially of younger generations, that facts are not what appears on journals, and instead, facts can only be what is the product of high standards of research integrity. Importantly, many emerging works in our field also reflect these new values, e.g. Al-Houri et al., Al-Houri-Amp, Hiver, Al-Houri-Amp, Vita, Gass et al., Larson et al., Plonsky. So instead of being worried about being wrong, there is a growing sentiment today that we should be more open, if not perfectly willing to be wrong, because this helps the advancement of science, which is perhaps compatible with the Popperian principle of falsifiability Popper, 2005. However, in SLA there have been some calls to go beyond what may perhaps be overly used notions from the philosophy of science coming almost exclusively from Popper and Kuhn Al-Houri et al., 2023, p. 278. I have noticed this is a common problem. Usually when scientists cite works from the philosophy of science they may limit themselves to classical literature, overlooking new developments in that discipline, and leaving the incredibly sophisticated contemporary literature out of the picture. Falsifiability, Popper 2005 and Paradigms Kuhn 2012, are important concepts, but they are not all there is to know about the philosophy of science, and their prominence in scientific literature may result in a memification of these ideas. Al-Houri et al. 2023 point out an emphasis on cycles of paradigms, and on falsificationism risks rushed decisions about the fate of a theory which is still developing, and whose criteria for falsifiability may still be unclear. Big, well-established theories, subscribers and dogma could be viewed as predators of sorts for new theories. Novel ideas, pluralism, and theoretical maturation become difficult endeavors in this context. While I agree these may be stereotypical notions that may result in problematic attitudes, I would also like to qualify that for Popper, more than merely a practice to get rid of bad theories as soon as possible. Falsifiability was more of a minimum criterion of demarcation, and that the demarcation problem, i.e. determining what is science and what is pseudoscience, remains open to much discussion in the philosophy of science. It is by no means a settled issue. Musgrave Amp Pigeon. The spirit behind falsifiability was that scientific theories and statements should be
capable of conflicting with possible or conceivable observations.
Popper 2005 saw an asymmetry between verification and falsification. 1, 2, 10, or even an infinite amount of observations will not verify a 4 generalization. Yet only one exception is needed to falsify a generalization. For theories to avoid remaining both hypothetical and untestable, that is, to become empirical, some criterion was needed, and he proposed falsifiability as such a criterion. So for Popper, a scientific fact was a falsifiable fact. I would also qualify that Kuhn did not exactly think science operates in cycles of paradigms, but in fact he thought paradigm shifts were quite rare. Hansen, 2021, especially successful shifts. Instead, Kuhn thought scientific progress only takes place in any clear way during periods of normal science, where normal means conventional or agreed upon. It is true, he found mature sciences followed a historical path of paradigm transitions. Kuhn, 2012, p. 13, but he was not a positivist. Whether transitions from one paradigm to the next led to progress was framed by him as not a very straightforward issue.
There are losses as well as gains in scientific revolutions, and scientists tend to be peculiarly blind to the former.
P. During normal scientific practice, however, one led by a paradigm, there would be no controversies over the fundamentals. Kuhn, 2012, XLE. For Kuhn, a fact was a sort of tip of the iceberg, where the iceberg represents all the fundamental assumptions that support that fact. Thus, at least through Kuhn's original terminology, SLA would actually not qualify for having paradigm shifts because, given that there is no agreement over the fundamentals of language and acquisition, we do not have what he would have called a paradigm in the first place. Rather, we have many theories that propose different conceptions over the fundamentals, resembling more broken sheets of ice on a lake. He called this kind of field pre-paradigmatic.
Theories are socially significant.
The stance I adopt on the philosophy of science, as I will elaborate in the sections that follow, is sociological in nature, taking into account ideas and discussions that were sparked by Ludwig Wittgenstein, 1989, 1900 Fleck, Ludwig Fleck, von Feyerabend, 1924, 1994, as well as current works by important contemporary philosophers of science, such as Helen Longino, 1990, and Naomi Oreskes, 2019. While I do not subscribe to any of these thinkers' ideas in any coherent way, because 1, they would not necessarily agree with each other, 2, some of them held contradictory ideas as we all do, and 3, probably all of them would reject indiscriminate subscription. One crucial idea that has nonetheless been a constant in all my readings is this: scientific theories, even ones with the firmest grasp of reality, are ultimately human products with inevitable biases. We choose what to see and what to take seriously based on our lived experiences, and these biases end up being built into scientific theories, which has a social impact in the world. The mechanisms through which humans can learn or adopt additional languages in different contexts throughout their lifespan, under what conditions, and how this constantly changes them, and the society around them, are scientific matters with the potential to inform all manner of issues, from the survival of endangered languages to linguistic policies in multilingual settings, not to mention issues pertaining to migration and the forced displacement of people, which are some of the great challenges of this century. This is the reason why diversity in science is important, because each community highlights different concerns and point at different phenomena to be explained, thus forcing dominant, culturally skewed scopes to enrich their worldviews and expand their notions of what is possible, and what exists in the world which may not be addressed as yet. So, on the one hand, theories are explanations which are sometimes powerful enough to cure cancer or destroy entire cities with atomic bombs. But, on the other hand, they are also never more than representations of reality. And as such, there is always room to discuss what should be represented and explained, and how, as well as what should remain unaddressed and irrelevant, and why. This is especially the case in the social sciences, where the difference between what is being observed and what is being interpreted is a much more complex ontological issue, when compared to the natural sciences. As Newfield et al. 2022 lucidly summarize in a short but very sobering statement, all representation distorts. p. 15. Consequently, no one group of people can so easily create representations that will be useful or successful across worldviews. Based on the case for consensus building put forward by Oreskes, I have come to understand representations have to be informed by both diversity and collaboration. Put in simple terms, we refine each other. My bias will be obvious to you, but invisible to me, and vice versa. As we can all see the exact same empirical evidence through a different lens, objectivity is the collaborative sum of subjectivities. And if we do not acknowledge this, knowledge-making will remain a problematically skewed and fragmented endeavor. However, while refining each other, openness to being wrong and falsifiability may be key to science-making, unfortunately these ideas are often tacitly framed in terms of competition, rather than a collaborative process of knowledge generation, where biases can clash and lead to a negotiated view. Holstein 2022 even employs an analogy where SLA theories are seen through a Darwinian perspective of natural selection, p. 446, echoing Popper's use of such a metaphor, Popper 2005, p. 91, but I argue this could only be appropriate under certain assumptions, that the strongest theories naturally survive unmediated by social factors, and 2. If we subscribe to the idea that theories should be examined exclusively through their logicality, explanatory power, falsifiability, rigor, and strength of evidence, in disregard of how socio-historical contexts and values influence how we understand those factors. Everything I have learnt from the sociology of science tells me we should reject both notions and embrace models that regulate competition for survival rather than presuppose it. I offer we should strive to be right, not through a fundamentally competitive process, but through collaboration, and the reason is that ultimately, whether basic or applied, science will have an impact in society and decision-making, which brings along an incredibly significant ethical responsibility, to strike a balance between what nurtures science, which is disagreement that leads to innovation, and what nurtures policy and decision-making, which is a scientific consensus. Boumans and Martini, 2014, p. 4. Accordingly, the last characteristic of theories I would like to highlight in this chapter is that theories are socially significant. Big social risks lie in not having a rigorous, dominant, robustly confirmed theory, or in having it fail, because society resorts to science to bring clarity to important and even urgent issues of interest, seeking to inform how serious problems can be tackled. It is in this context that defining SLA as an applied science where L2 pedagogy is arguably the main application, Ellis, 2021, p. 202, and which happens to largely study a sample that is unrepresentative of humans at large, namely, instructed learners in privileged situations. Ortega, 2019, seems considerably skewed towards a first-world bias. And it creates the illusion that the field has a relatively low social impact or significance, that not much is at stake if SLA remains a pre-paradigmatic science. What I advocate for is to build our field's identity through more active and intentional attempts at including as many worldviews as possible, continuously avoiding culturally skewed theoretical frameworks, and where we have a rigorous basic science that is able to explain complex phenomena comprehensively, and thus is able to accurately, to the best of our ability, and coherently inform decision-making of all kinds. Collaboration in theoretical development is at the heart of such an attempt, because as I have tried to make the case here, theories are the starting point, the means, and the asymptotic end goal of science. Through such a framework, both disagreement and diversity of views are important elements in the quest to refine, or even revolutionize science. But openness, communication, coordination, cooperation, and collaboration become crucial in daily scientific practice, as the means to regulate the whole process.
Summary of propositions in Chapter 1.
Ample evidence exists on many SLA issues, but there is no agreed unified theory to validate them and coherently accumulate such findings, which places theories and not evidence at the center of many scholars' priorities. Scientific theories are not hypotheses or suppositions, but explanations. Theories do not cease to be theories after they are confirmed. An accurate explanation can come before or after empirical evidence is produced, as exemplified by the atomic bomb and aircraft flying. Theories allow us to interpret the evidence. As soon as we interpret the data, we engage in explanatory efforts, ergo we inevitably engage in a theoretical discussion. The validity of studies is not theory independent, because the designs and methods employed in studies are created under specific theoretical assumptions. Scientific evidence cannot exist in a theory-free fashion, because the exact same evidence can be explained through different, competing, and even contradictory theories. Statistical inference is not theory. Neutral, theoretical assumptions in statistical paradigms may be at odds with theoretical assumptions in SLA. A fact is not what is shown through empirical evidence, but what is shown through what a theory says can count as empirical evidence, which varies from theory to theory in the absence of a unified and confirmed one, a Kuhnian paradigm. Theories are socially significant. Even confirmed theories may eventually be found to encode deep biases or be proven wrong, which is not inconsequential since ultimately society trusts science for policy and decision-making, which reveals the centrality of theoretical development in science, as well as the need to regulate it through both pluralism and coordination.